The deterioration came alongside antenatal and postnatal depression with both of my children. It was then exacerbated by my daughter beginning kindergarten. Most people think of that as such a sweet moment of their child's development. Finally off to school, how cute they are in their little school uniforms. At 4 years old, it was a double whammy for me psychologically. She was at the same age as I was abused when I was much younger. And I was sending her to school for the first time, to a place where it's assumed children are safe. However, I knew that it's not the case. Could she be next? I felt like I was potentially sending a lamb to slaughter. As much as I knew about the education system, being part of the education system, that was still no solace for me. So inner peace was shattered. Staying alive was now my priority. So Pandora's box of my past was well and truly blown open, with a great deal of professional support. It's a very slow process, many, many years and multiple professionals. Eventually, I understood what happened to me, and I could gradually shed my guilt, my blame and my shame. Things that I had held for so long. How could I not see the reality of all of these things for so many years? How did I allow that guilt, blame and shame to sit with me for so long? I was highly intelligent, yet I couldn't see through those things. Childhood trauma fundamentally changes the brain. That's why. Inner peace was back in sight, but still so far away. However, it was closer now than it had been ever before, post-abuse. Because I had more understanding of the fundamentals as a scientist of the brain, how the brain works and how trauma changes the brain. I've continued working with mental health professionals for many years now, but eventually my mental health progress stalled. I'd been through this phase that I'd shed my guilt, the blame, the shame, I'd put it where it belonged, not with me. I'd done nothing wrong. But I couldn't move forward in my healing until I took the next step, a massive leap into the unknown, which for a person with large trauma background, that's really difficult. I needed to speak to police regarding my abuse. I now felt that I needed to seek justice because I understood what had happened to me. It was such a terrifying proposition. Not only was I still a goody two-shoes, I never had a reason to interact with police at all. Not even for a random breath test. I was so scared just of that idea of having to go to a police station, to speak to a police officer. I had not disclosed my abuse in its entirety to anyone outside my psychiatrist. The thought of retelling the totality of my abuse in minute detail to a stranger was mortifying. And to add salt to the wound, that my detective was a male. To have someone taking my story, one I had not shared in this detail for 18 years, and losing control of who knew that information and what was going to happen to it. It's terrifying. For years, only I knew and I had control. And I was passing that to someone else. Absolutely terrifying. It was definitely not a time for inner peace. It was continual inner turmoil. I'd let go of a massive part of me to police. At about the same time of having to take this leap into the unknown, trying to seek justice, the Me Too movement was gaining momentum worldwide. Inside, I was starting to feel that it might be okay to speak my truth. Maybe the taboo was finally beginning to lift. I remember a friend from high school posting on social media regarding her experience of sexual assault as an adult, alongside #MeToo. I remember commenting on her post, just #MeToo. My first public acknowledgement of being a victim. I shook as I typed. But it was time. I was putting it out there to my broader friendship group that, yeah, I'm part of that group too. They had no context, but it was my first public acknowledgement. Not long after this, the Let Her Speak campaign was on the rise. Jane Doe, who we now know is Grace Tame. I followed that very closely in the media. I actually remember going back in time, I can remember when Jane Doe reported the abuse to her school and it was in the media. And I was amazed at her strength to speak as a child at the time she was being accused. However, the backlash she received as a victim at the time was horrendous. It was vicious, it was sickening, and kept me very much close-lipped. I would be labelled the same way. The Let Her Speak campaign was different though. People seemed to be listening. She was being believed. And the backlash had somewhat dissipated. For me, that was a moment of, well, maybe I could speak up. And maybe I would be believed too. So the time was right to take the plunge, which was when I started to work with police. The criminal justice system, for me, was horrific. It was over 2 years between when I had my first discussions with police to when a judgment and sentence were handed down in the Supreme Court by Chief Justice Blow. The anxiety, stress, and re-traumatisation through this process was relentless. I was working with police, the Department of Public Prosecution, victim support, the Department of Justice, the Magistrates Court, Crown Counsel, witness support, the Supreme Court. It was mind-boggling for someone who had never so much as experienced any sort of interaction with police, let alone with the court system. There's so much to it, which I now know way too well. Everyone was always so busy. However, my case seemed to just be going nowhere. The times between interactions with these people were just as hard as the interactions I was having with them themselves. The loss of control, the unknown, the waiting, the rumination, the adjournments was relentless. We can draw parallels between the time in the justice system and what was actually done to me at the time of abuse. I felt like I was just another historic case, and it was at the bottom of the list. Despite constantly chasing the contacts I had for updates, for information about, well, what's next, what's going on. It was devastating. This silence from this massive beast that I had let take control of my experience. Having said that, there were two beacons of hope in that massive system. I had two beautiful humans, one from victim support and one from witness assistance. They were so patient, understanding, and non-judgmental, kind. I met with them so often. That frustration of waiting and lack of information, they became my conduit. But even though I wasn't getting information, they were there, and they were part of the bigger beast. They did so much for me, above and beyond their role. What is so unfortunate is the victims have no access to these people until well after their engagement with police. They have to make their complaint. It has to be investigated. It has to go through the DPP, and it has to be formally put forward as a case. Only then can you have access to these beautiful people. The road to justice itself is long and decimating for victim survivors like myself. From my perspective, the system is geared so much towards the perpetrators, not the victims. We pay such a massive personal price to be able to see through the process. This is why relatively few reports actually end up as convictions. As the days, the weeks, the months, the years drag on, more and more victims cannot maintain the fight. They withdraw their complaints, the cycle continues. And the legal profession know this, and they abuse this. Perpetrators and their lawyers deliberately draw these things out because they know we give up because we're too tired, we're too broken. There's definitely no inner peace here. If anything, it seems to be moving further and further away again. However, this time it was courtesy of the justice system, a system that's meant to serve us as a community. Within my case, even the name of the charge, the police and the DPP were using, some of you will be familiar that for very long time, the charge was maintaining a sexual relationship with a young person under the age of 17 years. That in itself is heartbreaking. That word relationship, for me, perpetuated the myth that I was consenting to the abuse. That I wanted it or I asked for it. Thankfully, the charge was amended in early 2020, prior to my case being heard by the judge. My abuser was actually charged with a crime that is far more befitting for me. Persistent sexual abuse of a child. Words are powerful. We have to choose them wisely. Eventually I had my days in court, and they were horrific. But I was well supported by those who cared for me, as well as professional staff. The support in the court system for victims is amazing, but you've got to get to court before you get access to them. And of course, you know, not all victim survivors have families and friends that are in a position to support them. There were parts of those days that cut so deeply, and they still haunt me now. As expected by many of you, you're being questioned in the witness box is one of them. Being repeatedly told that you're lying and that you don't really remember. I was even victim blamed, victim shamed by defence while in the witness box. What an abomination. Why is this even allowed in our courtroom still? Given the mountain of evidence that is showing the additional harm this causes to survivors, victim blaming and victim shaming are the easy defence. It's the low blow. Why are we allowed to do that anymore? We can't use gender, race, culture. There are so many defence lines that lawyers cannot use in court. But this is not one of them. They're still allowed to do it. And why? I had to describe highly traumatising events pertaining to my body in absolute minute detail to the court, which include strangers, the perpetrator was right there, and my loved ones and friends were right there. How could I even say those words? And for those people who I love, how could they bear to listen to them? I have to admit, I put on my scientific hat to make them slightly more uncomfortable, and I describe those things in such minute scientific detail, using all the right biological terms, of which they always responded as genitalia. So there were small parts of vindictiveness in there as well. Reading my victim impact statement to the court, hearing myself saying those words aloud made them so real and cut so deep. The impacts of my abuse were always there. However, it's another thing entirely to acknowledge them so formally in words and have them put on the public record. Was it worth it in the end? Yes. I gained a positive outcome. My abuser was given a 3-year custodial sentence, as well as other conditions. Part of me had found inner peace, and it wasn't going anywhere. It was inner peace for little me. As I'd finally gained the power and made him accountable for his actions. At this point, it was a huge turning point. I now deemed myself a survivor rather than a victim. Up until I gained justice, I was a victim. But now, I'm a survivor. It's a monumental change in mindset. However, I don't know that I would knowingly put myself through that again. All the way through the criminal justice process, the police and the Department of Justice staff openly discussed the challenges that lay ahead. And they were right. However, I was determined to get justice despite the feeling I was dying a little more for every additional day that passed. Not everyone can do that. It's so hard. For little me, an inner peace, the icing on the cake, was actually being able to stand up as an adult and own my story. To speak my truth and be believed. I chose to speak to the media. To break the silence of the last 20 years. The guilt, the blame, the shame, they were laid bare right where they belonged, at the feet of my abuser, rather than inside me. All the local Tasmanian speculation of who was it? Oh, it must have been. It had been smashed. It was me. I wasn't ashamed to say so, and I hadn't said so earlier because law dictated that I couldn't. My perpetrator was put on a pedestal, but I was silenced. So as soon as that day came that I could invoke 194K of the Evidence Act, I was there. I'm not making it about him anymore. This is me. This is what it looks like. Many questioned my decision to speak to the media. However, no one outside those who have trodden the path before and after me can really understand just how liberating it is to break that silence and to publicly take back that power that was exploited years earlier. Now it was Big Me. Big Me was emerging triumphant. Apart from the overall positive outcome of the case, amidst the devastation, there were moments of great affirmation for me. I possess 2 documents written by Chief Justice Blow. One is what's called the Reasons for Determination, which were ordered not to be published, and then the comments on passing sentence, which of course are published. I cried so much as I read these documents, particularly the earlier document, which unfortunately the public doesn't have access to. I could hear Chief Justice Blow reading them in my mind. The documents were written as impartial, as they should be. However, as I read them through my lens, they had so much more meaning. It was like he was writing to me in code and reading between the lines such powerful messages, most of which, unfortunately, I'm not able to share with you. I will share one though. which is from the comments of passing sentence. Justice Blow stated that she has a successful marriage, some children, and employment. If you know Justice Blow, take yourself there. She has a successful marriage, some children, and employment in a rewarding position in which she is highly regarded. However, she continues to suffer the psychological effects of Mr. Pollard's sexual abuse in all sorts of ways. No summary of her victim impact statement could fully convey the enormity of the consequences of her sexual abuse by Mr. Pollard. That last sentence says it all. He could not take what I have read in court and summarise it in his statement of passing sentence. That meant so much, that how much that information had moved him and how much he could not actually give justice to rephrasing it, to put into his document. Just because I hadn't had enough, enter the civil justice system. It's a whole new beast to navigate. This was not to seek justice concerning my abuser. This was about accountability for the institution that did not keep me safe. They knew I was being abused, did not make the abuse stop, and they blamed me for the relationship. This too has been somewhat horrific experience, and it's still ongoing. Over 2 years I've been in this phase, attempting to gain justice and accountability. While literal me still has inner peace shining brightly, inner peace for big me has been obscured a bit more now. The repeated re-traumatisation to answer questions from my lawyers, complete assessments by professionals, to inform the case, it's continually poking the bear. Despite having to move through a plethora of stages in the criminal process and sitting in the witness box, perpetual waiting of wheels of justice to grind is intolerable still in the civil system, even though they work quite independently. As I said earlier, that as much as people try, no one can truly understand, outside of other survivors who have travelled the path, the continual internal struggle to make it from day to day, with this going on in the background. The mental load is immense, and we're expected to front up to life, doing life like it's not even there. As for inner peace right now, during civil litigation, it's a bit in retrograde. I received some very disappointing news this week about the choices of the defendants. This is impacting inner peace for big me though. Little me's still at peace. I'm fighting accountability from a massive institution. The David and Goliath situation. And I can't say much about this phase. However, I can guarantee at no point in this process will a gag clause be included in any form. In the last 4 years, I've had a number of people ask me, including older family members, why now? Why didn't you speak up then? Why drag it all up again? Why not leave it in the past? You can hear them, can't you? yes, my abuse is deemed historic in terms of time and the law. However, most people do not understand the trauma from that abuse is ongoing. The psychological and, for me, physiological effects that still present now, 24 years later from the second lot of abuse. I live with them every day. The memories, the pain, the emotions, they will never go away. Yes, I move through times of it being partially obscured by other things, or I reshape and refile aspects of that trauma with professional help. I've had to bring it up now so I can heal something that I'm unable to do while I live in denial. Standing here today speaking of my experience of abuse, the justice system and seeking inner peace was unfathomable for me 5 years ago. I could barely speak of what happened to me. And now I'm quite an outspoken advocate for the safety of children and the prevention of child abuse. I never saw that happening in my wildest dreams because it was such a secret. No one could know. It's amazing what happens when we regain our power and we shed that guilt, blame and shame that we harbour. I now have my fingers in so many pies. I hope that my insights can help promote change within institutions and the community more broadly. I gave evidence to the Tasmanian Commission of Inquiry into child sexual abuse in institutional settings. I sit on the lived experience advisory panel within the Department of Justice, who are working on the Child and Youth Safe Organisation framework, have regular meetings, provide feedback to the Office of Safeguarding Children and Young People, who, for those who don't know, they sit amongst Department for Education, Children and Young People, which used to be the Department of Education. And I'm working with Tasmanian Police on their pilot multidisciplinary centres, their program, if you're familiar with that. Plus I engage with to and fro contact with parliamentary ministers and the Premier to push for action rather than just words in a space of child protection and abuse. Speaking out has not only given me the voice and power I had lost for so long, but it has given others the encouragement they need to speak. There have been beautiful people who have disclosed their own experiences to me. Come to me with hypothetical questions. Come to me for advice. Come for me for a contact. Who do I go to? Ask questions about particular stages of the justice process. I feel so privileged that these people have chosen to and felt comfortable to speak with me about such personal experiences. Speaking out empowers others, other victim survivors, and diminishes the power that the perpetrators possess. It goes without saying, to get through the process, to get where I am now, I've had a whole lot of support from my family, my friends, medical professionals, allied legal professionals and personnel, and other victim survivors, no matter how hard people try and their best intentions. No